Hi. So I watched a remake of a movie over the weekend. It was the remake of Fright Night, which I heard was really good. I've held off on watching it all the way up until the last couple of days ago. I did wind up watching it, and I did wind up finding myself enjoying it. And that kind of led me to think about a couple of things concerning remakes. Mainly just the concept of a remake and why a remake would exist. I think personally that a remake absolutely has to justify its own existence. And the reason why I say that is because when I looked at the Fright Night remake, it was basically telling the same story with the same characters, but there was enough of the circumstances and enough of the characters that were remixed or just adjusted to where it was still interesting. Now, I'm comparing this also to the Psycho remake, which came out in, I believe, 1999, where it was a shot-for-shot remake, and it was completely like, there's no reason for that remake to even be made. If you're going to completely one-for-one the entire thing, or whatever, there's no point making that remake. You might as well just watch the original Hitchcock film and enjoy it for what it's worth. But this movie, Fright Night, the remake, was actually done by the same director, Tom Holland. He took the characters that he created, because he wrote the story too, if I remember correctly. He took the characters he created and switched them around enough to where they was different, and it kind of complemented the time period that this was being released at. And it just felt like an entirely different film. I was like, okay, Jerry Dandridge is like way more brutal. He's kind of he was a bully in the original one, but Jesus, he was like way more brutal in this version than in the original version. So it's one of those things where I like both of those movies separately for their own merits, but I don't feel like that was a wasted opportunity in a remake. A lot of remakes that I've seen, especially remakes of things that are very popular, they fail to capture the energy or the magic of the original. And a lot of times when they remake stuff, they completely lose sight of what actually made the original thing worth watching in the first place. That's why I'm saying this. Like, I feel like any remake going forward, this is the Xxspiracy rule, that every remake has to justify its own existence, and it has to make itself as close to the source material or have some form of respect or reverence to the source material in order to be successful. You can't do some weird remake where everything is different, like completely different. Can't do some remake where you're shitting on the original movie or the source material, or you're basically saying that, oh, this was a movie that was made by a bunch of old white men or whatever. You can't do that shit anymore. You have to have some reverence or some form of respect to the source material, and it has to be done in a way to where it actually justifies its own existence. Otherwise, you're just blowing smoke up the audience's ass. So I told you that story because GOG said it had to convince Capcom fans of still wanting the original Resident Evil games, because there was a stint where GOG was actually talking about a situation where they were talking about the Capcom games. They wanted Resident Evil 1 through 3, the OG ones. And for some reason, Capcom, the person I talked to through Capcom, got it in their heads that the remakes make it so that the original games are obsolete, which, if you are a fan of Resident Evil, if you are a fan of those types of games, that's a load of shit. That is complete and utter total bullshit. So let's get into this article. According to GOG, they had to persuade Capcom that a market still exists for old school 3D era Resident Evil games. A revelation that was sorely needed considering the complete lack of awareness the AAA company typically possess. In an interview, GOG revealed that when they approached Capcom about bringing the original Resident Evil games to their storefront, they faced skepticism. GOG had to demonstrate to Capcom that there was still a viable audience for the full price release of the classic 1996 to 2002 era games, rather than just remasters of mobile ports. Capcom reportedly questioned whether the interest was enough to justify the work in licensing. GOG says that they built the case with data on fan petitions, community mod activity, Steam Workshop stats for the originals. Ultimately, Capcom agreed, allowing GOG to publish the original trilogy for modern PCs. Now, you shouldn't have to argue your case that much because there's still a love for those original games. I don't care if you remake every Resident Evil game, and it appears that as of this video, they're planning on remaking Resident Evil 0. I don't know why they're doing that. I don't know why they're basically just ignoring Code Veronica. They're probably saving that for a special point where they're actually like low enough in numbers to where the buzz for that will probably carry them in some form or fashion. But honestly, I don't have to stress at all that the Resident Evil series, the 1 through 3, are probably the gold standard for the series. I played the original Resident Evil. I played Director's Cut actually, and I really enjoyed playing Director's Cut. I played Resident Evil 2 OG. After that, I borrowed it from a friend. I remember that, and I had a really, really phenomenal time with it. When you get to that point where the loading screens where the door opens and the zombie comes out and walks towards you, and you're like, I don't know what the hell am I supposed to do. I can't do anything. What's going on? And it just kind of reminds me of the movie The Thing from Another World, where it sets up all these instances of people going through doors or opening doors and whatever. And there's a jump scare that happens in the middle of the film, where they open the door and the monster is like right behind the door. So it lulls you into this sense of security to where you are completely just hit with this instance of like, holy shit, something's going down. And this is pretty much what the first game was, like the loading screens with the door opening and you going in, and you're just kind of like, okay, this is normal. And then you go into the second game and get to a certain point and the door opens and the zombies come out, and it freaks you the fuck out. And if it's one of those, I know people were talking about on Twitter the concept of like, if you could have your memory erased of a certain game only to play it again fresh to get that original experience again. And a lot of people kind of said that with, say, the original Silent Hill or other games, whatever. I would like that with Resident Evil. I would like that to be able to play through Resident Evil 1 and 2 back to back like that again. It is just such a it's so brilliant or whatever for that time period. So I'm gonna jump over real quick to the PC Gamer article, because I believe this is what the Senkaku article is referencing. What you fail to understand, Mr. GOG, is that the new thing is shiny. And that's the mentality that a lot of these people seem to work off. It's mainly because a lot of modern executives or modern people that have been working at the company don't necessarily understand the history or the gravitas of the series. They don't understand like just the admiration that people have for the Resident Evil series and their experiences playing the Resident Evil games. I tend to share my colleague Ted Litchfield's philosophy when it comes to remakes. Do what you want, though I prefer a reinvention to a one-to-one remake. And I was just talking about that earlier. Just don't kill access to the original. It doesn't seem like too much to ask for the kids to get to play a version of a classic. I get to keep playing my old favorite like 2005 never ended. Everyone's happy. Yeah, fortunately for me, I still have Resident Evil. I have Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3 on the original PlayStation hardware. So I have the double disc Resident Evil 2, I have Director's Cut of 1, and I have Resident Evil 3. Like, so it's, for me, it's like, okay, I can just go back and play those anytime I want. So everyone is happy but Capcom anyway, which apparently took some real arm twisting to get the original Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3 PC releases on GOG last year. It seems GOG had to make a few persuasion rolls to get Capcom to agree to it. Not necessarily because the company had business concerns on the move, but more because its executives literally could not conceive as to why anyone would want to play the originals when the shiny remakes exist. Again, this is the problem. It's, oh, we have the remakes. The remakes are better than the originals, so why do people still want to play the originals? Even though the hatred of Resident Evil 3 remake can still be felt, like the ripples from that hatred, the reverberations from that hatred can be felt to this day. The fact that they left the clock tower section completely on the cutting room floor, despite that being a large portion of what people enjoyed about the original run of Resident Evil 3. Resident Evil 2, the remake, is an entirely different game from Resident Evil 2 like OG, to the point of where I went back to play Resident Evil OG, or Resident Evil 2 OG, and I was like, oh shit, there is a huge differences between these two games. Now, I love Resident Evil 2 Remake, but they are completely different games in their own right. They remix enough to justify that. I think that's why 2 Remake is actually the better remake. Resident Evil 1 Remake, fantastic. It's clearly a different game in certain aspects too, because it adds a bunch of lore and also adds like additional things like the Crimson Heads, which you have to either light on fire while they're dormant or avoid them because they're fast moving zombies. There's enough of Resident Evil 1 Remake and 2 Remake to actually justify its existence, but they're different games from the source. And to be able to play the original games should give you at least a bit more understanding of why those games were great. It's like, I've heard stories of kids basically saying they don't watch movies because they're old. Like, I won't watch the original blah, blah, blah because it's old. I'm like, get your head out of your ass. If you really respect films, if you really respect like just the whole concept of movies and just TV shows from any time period, you'd watch a lot of the older stuff because that gives you a bit more perspective and it gives you a bit more of an idea of how movies were made and what actually was done back then. Special effects, practical effects, like miniatures and things like that were rampant in a lot of older films, and they actually hold up better in certain cases because you're getting those. A lot of CG movies of the more recent years, they just don't hold a candle to a lot of that stuff. It's just out of respect, I would say, like you kind of have to watch a lot of older movies, or else you're clearly missing out on some things. If you're not being a well-rounded person, you're just kind of locked into slop. And I understand that people overuse that term, but the slop thing is kind of, it's very rampant in a lot of modern films. So anyway, Capcom was like, we have all those remakes. It's already a superior experience to those games. Says you, fucker. GOG's senior biz dev manager Marcin Pakzinski told the game business they really didn't see the value in bringing back the vanilla versions, which on the bright side confirms a lot of my prejudices about industry executives and their appreciation of art. Well, didn't Sean Layden, like back in the day, said he attended an event where people were playing the old Gran Turismo games, and he's like, why are people even playing these old games? They're crap. Like, and leave it to modern executives to not understand the value of things and just continue to think that they're peddling the new shiny thing or whatever. I have to think of, when I think of those types of discussions and those types of people doing stuff like that, what they're doing is basically peddling slop. It's okay, new thing is better than old thing, and that's all there is. And God, this is one of the things that irritates me the most, because it just tells me that, like, the lesson that needs to be learned is that you have to respect what came before, or else you don't have anything. In all honesty, if this is the mentality of the executives or whatever, you deserve to fail. You deserve to have everything that your work for crash down around you. So GOG had to work to convince Capcom that they do in fact exist human beings who like to play old games. It took a lot of convincing that there's an audience that has a lot of memories about those games, said Pakzinski, and would love to experience exactly the same game again. Thankfully, we were able to convince them, which is great. Of course, to be honest, I don't have memories of the original Resident Evil games. They seem way too scary for child me to ever pick up, but I still very much enjoyed leading back to the Spencer Mansion in all of RE1's PS1 era glory when GOG put out those releases last year. Now, honestly, I wasn't a big Resident Evil fan when the game first came out, and it's mainly because I thought it was just some hokey zombie thing. I'm a big horror movie fan, but for some reason I just did not like the idea of Resident Evil, and I don't know why. I just didn't. And then one day, as I was actually like, I used to work in a telemarketing thing. I did like a telemarketing service, basically for TV shows and commercials. It is basically you were trying to gauge the popularity of certain things that play during commercials, during actual pilots for television shows that they handed off to people to kind of review and watch. And I was getting off work one day, and I was like, I want a pizza and I want to play a video game. And for some reason, I'm like, I really want to play Resident Evil. I'm like, I've never been interested in Resident Evil games. I actually have the original Resident Evil comic, the promotional comic that came out when the game came out. But I just didn't care enough to want to play the game. And then, it's like, you should play Resident Evil. My brain's like basically doing that. Now, I had that happen in a couple other instances. And when I did pick up the game, I was hooked on it. So maybe it's like some form of divine intervention or whatever, but I really wanted to play Resident Evil. So I picked that up and played it, beat that, borrowed Resident Evil 2 from my friend, beat that, went and played the other Resident Evil games, and just got really hooked on it. To the point of where I even like RE Village and RE7. I know they're different games. I know they're not necessarily in the same vein as the original Resident Evil series, but I like the survival horror aspect of it, which is the core of what Resident Evil is. It might bamboozle the suits, but original games have their value even when you put out a new version that's been UE5'd up the wazoo. Preservation is a positive end in itself. We'd probably be in a better state if more people with their hands on their purse strings actually appreciated it, which I agree. I don't necessarily like the executive aspect of it. Like, just going back to the Sean Layden thing. Sean Layden was a big voice in Sony for a long time, and he was trying to push this idea that all these older games don't matter. And then people realized, oh, backwards compatibility is a thing, and so they decided to, instead of push for backwards compatibility on the hardware end, the PlayStation put out a whole service where you can buy old PS1 and PS2, PS3 games. So, I guess that's a mixed bag, but at least you're still getting to play all those games. I'm a big Intelligence Cube fan. So, if I can be able to play, say, Intelligence Cube or like any of the older PlayStation 1 games, I'm happy for that. So, I play a lot of old games out of both necessity and the fact that there's a lot of great games I missed out on because I couldn't afford those games at the time. And I would like to be able to play those games again and enjoy them for what they're worth. Some suit sitting in an office basically jerking himself off on the idea of like, we can just remake everything and people will just buy it because it's new and shiny, even though it lacks a lot of the charm of the older games, or it also has a bunch of weird things going on that are kind of modern pitfalls, like the yellow paint situation or any other stuff. I think that's one of the problems that we're dealing with, and I really wish we could like go back and have more people in higher positions appreciate older games for what they are. There's a whole conversation that happened on Twitter, I think in the last couple of days, about fixed camera angles and how it actually gave a sense of scale and cinematic beauty to something. That's the whole point of cinematography. Like, yes, I understand you should be able to control your camera or free control cameras or whatever. That's been a staple for a long time. But just the whole aspect, and you can see on here, the whole concept of fixed camera angles, that is cinematography in itself. If games wanted to be more like movies, you'd think more fixed camera angle scenes would be available in games. If we are chasing the movies or the games or art angle, the way to bring in the artistic nature of games would be by actually creating more fixed camera angles, more cinematography, more beautiful imagery. This is why I don't necessarily believe that video games are art, because people don't approach that in an artistic way. Games aren't just movies because they have a interactive aspect to them that make them unique into themselves. But anyways, I'm out of here. Thank you for joining me for this. See you next boss fight. Take care.